You are listening to a free version of Majority Report with Sam Seder. To support this show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Josh Orton will join us. He is the policy director and senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, who has just finished announcing that he is suspending his campaign. Also on the program, Trump launches an inspector general massacre. The election travesty in Wisconsin won't bring us results for a week. The Paycheck Protection Act already insufficient. And a Trump crony, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, treats nursing home COVID victims with hydroxychloroquine without their permission, and after a French report that they have ceased using it because it causes cardiac arrest. Meanwhile, Richard Burr's in jail as more stock trading based on Intel reports revealed. Target delivery workers walk out. Federal court led by Trump appointees okays a temporary abortion ban in Texas. And the right wing says it's fine, but 2,000 people died yesterday of COVID-19. I'm sorry, they say it's fake. 2,000 people died yesterday as Texas, Florida, and rural America are about to feel the worst of it. Prisons around the country erupt with infections, and some frontline doctors are calling for a reassessment of the way that we are using ventilators. All this and more on today's program. Well, ladies and gentlemen, obviously we had some late-breaking news today. And guys back in the studio, my understanding is that Josh is on the video Zoom. Okay, all right, I didn't realize. I was looking for him on the other thing. He can do the video Zoom, so we will do that. Let's bring him on. He is Josh Orton, the policy director and senior advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. And do we have him? Okay. And Josh, of course, also was one of the first producers we had on this program back when we were on radio. He is talking to us from Madison, Wisconsin. Josh, welcome to the show. It must be I imagine, sort of a sad day for you. I mean, of course, we have a horrible tragedy surrounding us right now in many respects. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it is it's obviously a sad day. It's been the greatest job I've had. I think back to a couple of the key moments in the campaign where, we did things that in 2 years ago, or, think of back when the show first started, that would seem just absolutely impossible, right? I mean, we announced a $16.3 trillion Green New Deal, right? And, even a couple of years ago, people would have said that campaign is over. That's a fringe campaign. That's impossible. And people had to react to it now, right? It became a mainstream position. I remember when Trump carried out the assassination of the Iranian general, right outside of Baghdad. Yeah. Soleimani. And I remember, other people sort of going up and clearing their throats and saying, this guy was bad, but, it's good, and, X, Y, and Z. And I remember, having a conversation with Bernie that the morning after.
Oh, we're losing him. Go ahead.
An event the
All
moral
right, sorry,
clarity,
Josh, we're losing you a little bit on the Zoom.
was significant. And, I'm very thankful that, it was one of these things where someone who did policy, normally what you see happen is that the think tanks basically put together a whole bunch of white papers, and the campaigns take them and then show in this campaign.
All right, Josh, we're losing you. Josh, can you hear me?
I think Bernie's going away.
Josh, Josh
response, and his top priority making sure that we're passing this response.
Josh, we're losing you. What I want you to do is call into the other system. Did we send you the other link? We're just going to have to do this via audio. I'm afraid, because we're just having trouble.
Is this any better?
A little bit.
Okay. The conversation was getting too intense.
Yes, I guess you were melting the internet. All right. Well, I mean, okay. So, and I want to get to sort of some of the things I heard in his announcement and going forward in a moment. But so you bring up the change in the conversation, and I often think of I think the early interviews that we did with Sanders in 2004, 2005, when you were producing the show with Janine and I. And I distinctly remember, getting off or ending the conversation by saying, and at that time, the idea that we were self-identifying as liberals in public was considered a radical idea.
Yes.
The idea that we were interviewing a self-identified independent socialist, I can't remember what the specific democratic socialist, I can't remember exactly how we would have brought him on at that time. Was, people were like, what? And I remember saying, we should be so lucky to have an entire Congress full of people like Bernie Sanders. At that time he was a House member, and yes, the conversation has moved dramatically, right? I mean, the idea that you could offer a Green New Deal, that you could say things like Henry Kissinger is not someone to be praised in public, and say that on stage and this and that, I think it's hugely important for setting the terms of the conversation. And I agree that on some level that it you need to change the terms of the conversation before you can put these things into action. But where are we on that accord? Like how much material benefit. It is good that there was a lot of people who said, I supported Sanders' policies, but I wanted to vote for the guy that I thought was going to win, et cetera, et cetera. But what does that mean in terms of actual material difference?
Well, I think what it means in terms of actual material difference is different today than it was in January, or what it would be had this pandemic not occurred, right? Because as recently as a few months ago, you saw Democratic opponents on stage talking about how, Bernie's plan for Medicare for all would kick 150 million people off of their employer health insurance, against their will. And I think at this particular moment, as unpredictable as it was at the time, that where people are actually talking about caring for the least among us, the people who are the most vulnerable. And I think what you're going to see is this conversation where, something that would not have been discussed before, all of a sudden we have a problem where, we can't, the problems with a privatized system, the problem with a privatized health system, with a privatized insurance system, with a completely disjointed economic system, just in talking about the response, one of the things that's come up over and over again is there's no real coherent way in which to create a safety net short term, because our economy has been so fractured and has been set up as an institution in such unfair ways. So I actually think that it is of utmost importance now that when we talk about, well, maybe Medicare should be covering all these bills, or maybe people should be able to enroll in Medicare when they get kicked off their private, when they lose their jobs. All of a sudden, people don't have employer-sponsored healthcare anymore. And so I think, had we not had that conversation up until now, I think the set of solutions or the options that would have seemed possible at this moment of crisis would have been much, much more narrow.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that there's been, and I think we have this problem across the board, frankly, is that we don't, on the left, have the same apparatus to have answers at the ready for when these crises hit. And because that doesn't pre-exist, it's, the right can just, and the center can take these things off the shelf because they're just sitting there. And now the capacity for those shelves exist, and there's some ideas that are sitting there.
Yeah, and in fact, what we've, if you're thinking about, back to sort of Naomi Klein's theory of, how the right wing will actually anticipate these crises, if not sort of prompt them themselves. If we think back to the Iraq War, in order to pull those things off the shelf. And, there is one, if there is one thing that I can be proud of in this moment, it is that when we're talking about what needs to happen in terms of paying people their own salaries, in terms of cutting $2,000 checks monthly to people, in terms of making sure that healthcare is a human right, it's that old sort of saying how it's where the old canard about how right-wing politicians didn't favor marriage equality or didn't favor gay rights until someone in their family came out to them, right? And where they thought, oh, someone actually is in need, maybe I should actually support this policy. And what's scary about these times is I think that people, everyone is affected, right? And so I think that now if people can get a sense, any sense of empathy, or sort of find a sense of empathy because of this crisis, I think, in some strange way, that's a silver lining.
Yeah, we had a caller yesterday who made the point that there's going to be millions of people who have never had experience with the unemployment insurance program, and they're going to begin to realize that this is not such a, it's not such a. And
I think, I think there's another thing to be talking about too in terms of the value of the public sector here, right? Because as we've been talking through solutions, and we've been talking about the unemployment insurance, as we've been talking about how to cover people through healthcare, whether it be, do we try and encourage states to ramp up Medicaid coverage? What we're running into over and over again is this problem of, well, you have all these conservative Republican governors and legislators who are going to, where the implementation of these things is going to be stymied in part by their political choices. And so, it's also, I think, and I don't, this wasn't, it shouldn't have happened this way, but I think that we're seeing, the flaw, of the sort of the conservative federalist notion that, states can and Republican governors can sort of piece things together as they want. I've been stealing a medical analogy that the coronavirus pandemic is essentially a barium dye test throughout our entire social safety net, right? We're seeing every little choke point and flaw as this comes together.
What do you think as you look back on the campaign? Are there things that you think that the campaign should have done differently at times? Well, I mean, what happened? 2 months ago, it looked like you had people on MSNBC saying like, "Yeah, I think this could work."
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if maybe I'll do that tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to do that today. Okay. I'm proud of the job that Bernie and Faz and others did. I think that I think that it shows the establishment still has a lot of power, and I don't think anybody was in doubt of that. I don't think anybody sort of expected it to come out in such a concentrated force as it did, but it did. I have to say I'm skeptical of a lot of the second guessing that we've seen in some of the publications recently, because I just don't think that I think that a lot of people want to talk about what they think happened wrong who weren't really involved in the campaign. And so, I would just ask people to for at least a day or two look at the positives and I'm certainly thankful for what we've accomplished.
So in the speech and then were the comments he just gave in announcing that he was suspending the campaign, there was a couple of things that stood out for me. One, he said